Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm
hope
so
you can hear
good.
me. It's not. You see, I'm sitting by a window. So
Oh, shame. No,
having
load
to deal
shedding
with
has sabotaged all of us today.
yo. But yeah, I mean, let's get into it. Thank you so much for documenting your experience in your book. We are the ones we need. Truly, truly important conversations were had, and conversations that were uncomfortable, conversations that got people really going through their minds and going, wait, I've gone through that, but I didn't quite know that there was actually a word for it.
Right.
Um, and how did you come about, deciding that I need to put this conversation into a book? Because it's quite hard confronting these conversations, and quite hard having these conversations out in the open, in tables with friends, without there being pushback, without there being but I'm fine, I'm okay, I went through that. At what point did you say, I need to put this into a book?
So when after I quit my job after a horrendous experience, which I detail in the book, I kind of just would do a bit of writing. A family friend had actually suggested to me and said, just as part of your healing, since you write anyway, just write, just, vent about your experiences, just as, your healing, to let it go. Because I had gone through a horrendous experience with the worst line manager in the world for almost a year. And so that trauma was quite extensive on me. But I never really planned to actually have it as a book until Ashwin Willemse had his situation when he walked off the set on Supersport. And I remember it happened on a Saturday night, and everybody on Twitter was talking about it. And I was just like, nope, don't get involved. This is the trigger. You're not going to be part of these conversations. Just walk away. And so I logged off Twitter, and that was that. But then I woke up on the Sunday, and then I started seeing white people and what they were saying as part of that conversation. And then I just lost my shit. And so I just did a whole thread about my experiences as a Black person within, the corporate SA. But obviously it extends to different work environments. And essentially that is what led to then my publisher reaching out to me and saying, why don't you actually document this in a book? And the reason why I felt it was important for me to actually document it in the book is that for the most part, Black professionals, although we all know that most of us are experiencing this, if not all of us, in some way or form, so many of us are too afraid to say anything because our employers are always watching what we're doing. We're being monitored on social media. We're afraid of being hauled in front of a disciplinary committee. We don't want to lose our jobs and our incomes. We have families that are relying on us, right? And we've been socialized to believe that this job in corporate is the only thing that we can possibly have or do with our lives. And so we don't even think about other possibilities. And so we remain stuck in the cycle.
And how was that then received? There was obviously, you'll be re-triggered when you share and you open up, but there's also perhaps the other side where you'll find people relating and going, I didn't know that there was a word to it.
Absolutely. There's been so many people who've read the book and said, thank you for writing it, because now I finally know, firstly, that I'm not crazy. I'm not overreacting. I'm not imagining what's been happening to me, but also I now have words that I can use to describe what I'm going through. So many people have come and said that, they keep referring back to the book. It's become like a Bible to them because every time they're faced with some kind of injustice or discrimination within the workplace, they go back and reference quickly, and then they go into the workplace and are able to address that particular issue. So they feel a lot more confident about, dealing with these things, as they occur, which is a fantastic thing. It's definitely what I hoped for when I wrote the book. But it's also, the sad side of it is, being constantly reminded of just how many of us are actually going through this. It's actually scary numbers, because it's great as a writer to have people who can relate to your work and can see themselves in your work. But it's also for a topic like this, it's a very painful reality to see that so many young Black people are going through such a horrible experience at work.
And I mean, for those that are familiar with who you are, how would you best describe yourself now and the space that you're in now and the important work that you are currently doing within the space of workplace transformation, and just for people to understand the toxicity that we face in the workplace and what needs to change in order for us as Black people to get to a place where we're comfortable and happy and have healthy experiences working whilst Black?
So when I was still employed, I've been out of the formal workforce for about 5 years now. When I quit my job with no job, because it was that bad. But I'd always thought that my career would be about me just being in corporate. I always was this. I saw myself as the girl who comes to work, kicks ass, does her, does a brilliant job, wears the power suits, climbing up the corporate ladder. That was always the picture. That was always the dream. But having gone through my experiences, having written the book, having had various conversations with people, it's been the book has been out for 2 years almost now, and it's been a period of so much growth for me, because I've grown in confidence as well. Because I was somebody who tended to shy away from confrontation, because I don't want to deal with the drama. I'm trying to avoid confrontation. I don't need all of that negative energy. Can we all just work and get along and everybody minds their business? Unfortunately, even if that's the way that I approach things, that's not how other people deal with situations, right? And what I also found was that in the workplace, generally, if you mind your business and you just get on with your work, it bothers a lot of people. And so I'm now in a space where I have embraced being an agitator. I'm the person who now embraces going into a space and asking difficult questions and not being concerned about how you're going to respond, because the questions need to be asked. I'm very much of the view that if we're having conversations about things like transformation and diversity and inclusion and workplace culture, if those conversations are not uncomfortable, if people are not getting pissed off at that table, then you're not having the right conversations. And I think one of the key things for people to understand is that when you are dealing with these types of issues, you have to anticipate that. You have to anticipate aggression. You have to anticipate resistance. You have to anticipate some sort of defense mechanisms kicking in, because people are resistant to change because they feel threatened by it if they've always been in a position of power.
Absolutely. And you recently also started a podcast, The Workplace Revolution. How is that going? And what do you hope for people to take away from the content of The Workplace Revolution?
So when I wrote my book, initially I thought I would just write the book and carry on with my life. But after getting feedback from people,
that's not quite how it works.
That did not happen. I never imagined that I'd be doing this work that I'm doing now, because wow. I'm supposed to be the PR girl.
No, you've got deeper work here.
Right? So after writing the book, I thought, okay, what can I do? Because there's a lot of things that need to happen before we start being able to really change workplaces, right? There's the culture issue, which requires engaging with organizations. There's the legal issue, which requires, even lobbying government to see how can we. Yes, we have great legislations in terms of labor law, but how do we ensure that they're actually effectively implemented and monitored? So there's various things that need to happen, which are going to take time. So I had to think about, what can I do now with what I have to be able to assist people, because we're dealing with these things on a daily basis. So first I launched workingwhileblack.co.za, which is an online repository of career-based information for Black professionals. And then the next step was the podcast. Yeah, I never thought I'd do a podcast, because I just never thought it was my thing. I was like, well, first of all, what am I even going to talk about for a whole 45 minutes? But the podcast, we're about 20 episodes in now, and it's called The Workplace Revolution with Sihle Bolani. And essentially the podcast for me is about speaking about revolutionizing the workplace by having the right types of conversations. So I bring in guests who are specialists in their particular fields, but I also have an anonymous feature where people who have experiences that they want to share but want to do so anonymously, because we understand how corporate works, then they're able to do that on my platform. But we covered different things from, workplace culture to mental health to, even issues of activism. What does activism look like for Black people? If you have listened to my podcast, you will notice that all of my guests have been Black women, and that is very intentional because Black women are my why. They are my first priority. And so that is the lens through which I want to look at the world. And I want to center Black women at the center of my version of diversity and transformation in the workplace and within society.
And what is your take on the conversation that's going on, especially around things such as Women's Days, Youth Days, and the conversations with regards to the types of feminism that we have? There's white feminism, there's Black feminism, of bringing people that are, you're saying the voice that you want to amplify is the Black woman. What is your take on bringing in and engaging the others within these conversations? Is it something that needs to be done intentionally? Or is it something that you feel as though, no, I want to have conversations for Black women with Black women?
I think there's two parts to it. I think there's definitely a need to create a space for Black women to be safe and authentic about their experiences, because we don't have enough of those that are meaningful. I've attended over the years so many Women's Day brunches and lunches and all of these things, and I've always walked away from it kind of feeling like,
what was the point?
Okay, what was the point of that? I don't understand what was happening. And so it was important for me to create spaces that enable us to have the real conversations about the real issues, but also to start breaking down the barriers and the walls that exist between us as Black women. And for us to be able to find a common ground and help us realize that actually we're not in competition with each other. We need each other. We're fighting this together with all of the various intersectionalities that exist within Black womanhood, because there isn't one version of a Black woman. As far as other groups is concerned, outside of that, like for instance, Black men and white women and white men, they absolutely should be part of the conversation, but it's not our job as Black women to call you to be part of that conversation.
Thank you.
You must actually come and say, we are here and we want to be part of the change. How can we work with you to change things or to change the system, whatever the case may be? I'm not going to go and drag you and come and force you to come and sit at this table, because it's not my job to do so. It's not my job to do that labor for you. But also don't come to, if you do decide you want to be part of the conversation and you want to be part of the change, don't come empty-handed. Don't come with an empty brain. Go and do your research, go and read, go and understand the environment, so that when we are having these conversations, you're bringing something and you're adding something to the conversation.
Absolutely. And I love that you highlighted that unapologetically so, in that we need to stop dragging these people that we need as allies to the table. They need to voluntarily come and do the work that needs to be done. I want to talk and outline what toxicity and what a toxic environment looks like for those that really are not sure, especially because we're in lockdown. I've had a lot of women that are during this lockdown are like, my boss now calls me at 8 o'clock at night, and I'm busy feeding the kids, so I'm trying to put them to bed, but because he locked down, I've kind of just gone with it. We all have bad Mondays, we all have challenging weeks, we all have disappointing months or disappointing month ends where there's a lot more month at the end of the money. How do we define exactly what toxicity is? Because I think we have a tendency of Black women to keep it moving, keep going, just do what needs to be done. We'll figure it out in a pandemic. It doesn't matter what package toxicity looks like. We've still not properly defined it for ourselves.
Well, if you think about just the concept of toxicity, toxic, anything that is toxic is something that is harmful to you, right? It makes you ill in some way. And if you think about it in the context of relationships, it's an abusive partner, whether they're abusive emotionally or financially or physically or whatever the case may be. that's toxic. It's harmful to you. It creates a negative, or it has an adverse effect on you. And when you look at it in the context of the workplace, the same principle applies. And the various ways in which toxicity can manifest itself in the workplace, gosh, and there are so many. There are so many, because it's so pervasive, right? Because in the workplace, nobody's going to come and call you the K word or the N word, and they'll be like, right, you're racist. Okay, so there's so many. It's actually quite insidious the way that it works. But some of the examples include things like, being in an environment where you don't feel free or comfortable to be able to express or voice your opinions, because you know that there will be some sort of repercussions. You know that you're not supposed to say anything, or your black colleagues will always be like, shh. Organizations where there's a high staff turnover, where people are leaving regularly, and specifically a particular group of people. If you pay attention to who is leaving an organization, that'll tell you a lot about the issues within that organization. Sexual harassment creates toxic work environment. Where organizations that embrace cultures of sexism, where men can say anything and get away with it because they're just the guys. They're just cracking jokes. Organizations that still hold on to this boys club mentality, that's very, very toxic, and it's very exclusionary. Being required to work around the clock. Don't call me at 8 o'clock. Organizations that don't give their employees the space and the agency to be able to set up boundaries are toxic environments, because you don't owe your life to your employer. You're there to fulfill a function that they pay you for. It is an exchange, but there are very specific guidelines to how that should work. There are very particular timelines through, within which you're supposed to do that work, and that shouldn't continuously infringe upon your personal time. I mean, yes, there will be instances where you're required to work overtime because maybe there's a project or a new launch or whatever the case may be, but those should be the exception and not the norm. And this is why it's so important that when people do join organizations, really look at not just your employment contract, but also the HR policies. Read every single thing, understand everything. Where there are gaps, ask the questions, seek clarity, and get it in writing. One of the biggest dangers that we face continuously is that HR policies are so vague. And so it makes it very difficult for people to be able to lodge claims, to be able to complain about anything, because it's neither here nor there, in terms of what your rights are as an employee. But it's so critically important to understand that. The other thing that makes employee works of what? Oh, my English bundle. Oh my God. What also makes workplaces toxic is things like cliques, right? Where people form these cliques and certain people are excluded or isolated. So that creates a lot of demotivation, where people are highly stressed all the time. That's not a healthy work environment. So those are just some of the examples. Oh, and also the other thing is, working in an environment where you're always made to feel like you should be grateful to be here.
Yes.
How dare you complain? Do you know how many people
have you seen your
die?
Typo? Have you seen your typo?
Right? And so that stuff has become acceptable. It's become so acceptable for line managers to treat people like that, to speak to people like that, and you must just take it because they're your boss. They're your line manager. You report into them. Their job is to enable you to do your job. Their job is to support you. If they're not doing that, that's a dereliction of duty, which is actually a fireable offense. And once we start understanding what our rights are as employees, what our roles are, and what the role of our managers are, then we're a lot more empowered to be able to take better control of the environments that we're in.
And I mean, these toxic workplaces can cause things like burnout, stress, serious disruptions in our lives, panic attacks, anxiety attacks. Lots of women have been hospitalized due to the anxieties and the stress and the stresses and the burnouts that they're experiencing within these toxic work environments. How do these things compound over periods of time to a place of explosion?
Yeah, so Just think about it. I mean, my personal experience was when I realized that I needed to get out of that environment was when I was rushed to an emergency room because of chest pains. And I think at the time I was like 32 years old.
Wow.
And to hear a doctor say to me, "You are at risk of having a heart attack," I knew that something is completely wrong with what's happening. Like something has
Mm,
got to change. And the problem with a lot of these experiences is that we endure. Just
hold
like
on in
women are
there.
told to endure in marriages, we are told to endure at work because so many people are out of jobs. Just be grateful, just keep your head down, just do the work, just keep pushing, just. And we don't actually prioritize taking care of ourselves and taking time out to actually breathe and to release. And so many people don't have spaces where they can vent about their experiences and feel validated and feel heard and comforted. And so you definitely, I mean, I've had conversations with medical doctors who will say that they're seeing a spike in the number of Black professionals who are seeking treatment for mental health. There's a spike in Black professionals who are being admitted into mental institutions. There's people suffering from anxiety, from depression. There are people who simply just can't function. Imposter syndrome is one of the symptoms of dealing with these types of issues. But also, you know, in addition to that, it can manifest itself physically. You know, so I had the severe stress, which was on a continuous basis for an extended period, which eventually manifested itself in having chest pains, which could have been a heart attack. Um, Somebody else, it might be arthritis. Somebody else, it might be a back pain that just never becomes a chronic back pain that never goes away. For some people, it might be migraines that never go away. And so it doesn't stop at just one thing if we still remain within that toxic environment and we're not actually addressing the issues and also seeking the help that we need to be able to make sure that we are managing our mental health effectively.
And I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier on about cliques and exclusion and like the gossipy behavior within workplaces. And you mentioned particularly cliques. These can contribute to toxic environments. And we're often told to just walk away, do your own thing, single yourself out, sit alone, just push your work. You know, it's really counterproductive though when you see these cliques form, you see this gossipy behavior form. But how does this affect you as an individual when you're told to just keep your head down and just do the work, focus on doing your work, leave the cliques? You didn't come to work to make friends when just focus.
Yeah. This is it's a very harmful narrative. Because what it does is it's saying to you, allow the culture to persist, allow what's happening to continue, regardless of how it impacts on you. You must just bear the brunt of it because you must not shake the table and you must not be an agitator of any sort. And what I've learned is that people who are bullies, people who are gossipers, that the minute that you call them out on their shit in that moment, they are always so shook they
Yeah.
never even know how to respond because they never anticipate that somebody's going to call them out on their shit. And that's what that's what they kind of bargain with, is that I can say whatever I want and nobody's going to say anything because they're too intimidated, because either I'm cool or I'm well connected within the organization, or I'm considered the star and so I can behave as badly as I want. There's always somebody who's going to, you know, have my back, or one senior executive is my sponsor within the organization, or I'm being fast tracked to the executive team or the C-suite, and so nobody's gonna
I'm
trust me.
untouchable. Yeah.
Exactly. Once you call them out on the spot, and if especially people who love doing it in front of an audience, and you call them out in front of their audience, they will never ever do that shit again. Trust me.
And but what bearing does it have emotionally? Because you call out people like that, especially those that are, like you mentioned, being fast tracked or have the audience of the big people in the organization. When you call those people out and they already have this audience around them, you become the victim. You now become a victim and you become the victim of bullying.
Well, look, the reality is that whenever you stand up against anything, especially within the context of any kind of injustice or any kind of bullying, you can anticipate some sort of retaliation. And this also applies for people who might, instance, need to report a case of sexual harassment within the workplace. They will likely be subjected to some form of retaliation. There's a woman who, I think it was probably last year, did a thread on Twitter about working for this multinational, and she was sexually harassed. She's married, she was sexually harassed. Even if she wasn't married, it would be the same thing. And she tried to get it sorted out, went through all of the various channels within the organization, even had to go as far as CCMA, and she still ended up being jobless. But even with all of that, she was empowered because she knew why she stood up for herself. She knew why it was important for her to speak up. And that's really the core of it. You are the one that needs to be okay and at peace with yourself at the end of the day. And the truth of the matter is that this one job is not the only thing that's available to you guys. There's an entire world that is open to us. And I think once we start opening our hearts and our minds to that, and we start exploring other opportunities, it feels so much more liberating. It's so much more freeing to be able to think, okay, there's so much more out there to explore other opportunities. And I think, yes, it takes a toll. Anytime you're going to fight against issues within the workplace, it takes a huge emotional toll, because the likelihood is that you are going to be defending yourself against an entire system. And, you know, you might be dealing with Johnny, who's one person. But because Johnny is an example, a living example of a culture within that organization and a reputational risk within that organization puts all of its resources into protecting Johnny, even though they know he's wrong, because they are trying to protect themselves and their bottom line and their reputation at the cost of people who are already marginalized in the organization. And so the choice then becomes, are you going to allow it and continue to suffer and continue to struggle with mental health issues and continue to be unhappy and highly stressed and underpaid and possibly lose your life because of the stress? Or are you going to do something about it and change your reality? Are you going to reclaim your power?
And I think I want us to also now talk about, I am stressed, I am underpaid, I'm carrying all this emotional burden because of the effects of what Johnny is doing to me. How do I, as an unmotivated worker within the workplace, contribute to the well-being of the workplace, first of all? And, am I now productive in the bigger scheme of things? And what kind of a workspace are we now creating of people who are carrying this toxicity, this unmotivated behavior, and this unmotivated, not behavior, but unmotivated morale around the workplace, because of single people such as Johnny?
So I think the first thing is that we can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're not okay, you're not going to be able to do anything for anybody else. You can't show up for anybody else until you take care of yourself. And that's a very difficult thing. And the reality is that it really depends on the organization. There are organizations that are receptive to people who come and say, I'm having an issue with such and such a person. This is my experience of them. These are the various incidents that have taken place, and I need assistance with resolving it, right? And maybe HR will step up and do their job and either mediate, or Johnny will probably be put on some coaching program or whatever the case may be, or be taught how to learn with how to deal with Black people in the workplace or something like that, So there are workplaces that do that. There are workplaces that genuinely do foster a culture of change when they do, hear about issues or issues are reported. But there are organizations that genuinely are unwilling to change. There are organizations where morale will never be positive because the people within that organization are insistent on being toxic. And that's when you then have to decide about whether that is the right place for you to be. We're not entirely powerless. But I think one of the other things that are so critically important, excuse me, for us as Black people within the workplace is prioritizing a culture of community amongst ourselves. You know, for so long we've been, you know, made to believe that there's only 5 opportunities available for the 400 Black employees within an organization. You know, there's only 1 seat for a Black person in Exco, and that's it. And so it creates this culture of, number one, competitiveness amongst Black professionals, and so we are seeing each other as enemies. And number 2, it gives rise to this culture of exceptionalism, right? White people are given opportunities because they have potential. They don't have to prove anything. They just have potential. But Black people have to be exceptional. You have to be brilliant-er, excellent-er, and still you won't get the same opportunities as Johnny. And so you really have to decide what it is that you want for yourself and for your career, and whether the environment that you're in is supportive of that.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot of professionals will also attest to the fact that they are underpaid and overworked. I don't know a single Black professional who does not feel this way. If there is one, please DM me and tell me I'm wrong. But how important is it to weigh how much we work and put in versus what really is healthy for us? You know, it's we work and hope will be seen. But like you've mentioned, we get hired, we get pulled into work opportunities because of the exceptionalism that we bring, not for our potential. So we put in, but what is the healthy portion for us to put in, to really say, okay, cool, you know what, I've worked for late.
Well, I think, I mean, it depends, because it differs person to person, and it depends on what your priorities are. Some people might feel, you know, I will give all my time because that's just, you know, what I enjoy doing. I thrive off of this high-paced hamster wheel thing. There are some people who genuinely thrive in that way. And then there are some people who might say, how do you find the balance, right? And I don't believe that there's such a thing as balance. I believe in prioritization, because, you know, I am a mom, I'm a single mom, but I'm also sihle, and I have my own needs and things that I want to do for myself. I also want to be able to go to the gym, but I also need to do my work. And what gets more of my time, it really depends on the day and what I'm prioritizing at that particular time. But what's important is being able to understand and define for yourself what's important to you. What are your priorities? And then obviously your employment contract says what hours you're supposed to work. So outside of that, there should be extenuating circumstances for why you need to work overtime.
Yeah, I think let's talk about that employment contract, those hours that you put on the employment contract. How binding is that?
It's binding. It's a contract. So it is essentially binding. So here's where it gets tricky, right? When you are in more junior positions, it's more acceptable for you to stick to those hours, right? If it says 8 to 4:30, 8 o'clock, you're swiping your card. 4:30, you're swiping your card, you're walking out of the office, right? It's acceptable. The higher you go up the corporate ladder, it becomes more and more gray, right? Because now you're seeing other people within your space, your peers, putting in more hours. They're now showing up to work at 7. And when you walk in at 8, they've already had coffee with the CEO, because they were there early. And so now you start to take on this pressure that you put on yourself. Oh, now I also need to show up at 7 so that the CEO can see that I'm also a hard worker, right? And then you see that they leave the office at 7. And now when you leave at 5, you're thinking, okay, what am I not doing? You know, never mind the fact that you've probably been in meetings the entire day and haven't actually had time to do your work. And the likelihood is that you're probably also under-resourced within your team, so you can't delegate any task. And so what happens? You leave at 5 or you leave at 7 and you get home, and what do? You get onto your emails, because now you need to catch up on everything else, because the culture, corporate culture, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in the United States, is very dog eat dog, work don't stop, we're chasing this capitalism, crazy. And we have to decide, we have to get to a point where we choose for ourselves what type of culture we want to have between ourselves and our work, because it's very, very possible for you to be able to deliver upon your work, to have proof of that, to be able to document the feedback from your stakeholders, to show consistently that you are delivering as required, that you're performing as required, that you're meeting all of your KPIs and whatever the case may be, and that's regardless of what time I come in or what time I leave. Now, the whole thing about hours, where it gets even trickier is when they're trying to force you out, because now you've been a troublemaker, right? And now they're sick and tired of your shit and they're working on constructive dismissal. And so your contract says, never mind the fact that, okay, your contract says maybe 8 to 4:30. Let's say you have been showing up at 8 and leaving at 6 consistently. The day they decide that they want you gone and you show up at work at 8:15 a.m., that's grounds for dismissal because it goes against your contract. So do you see, it's so important to read your contracts, to understand those policies, because when you know the rules, then you know how to play within those rules for your own benefit.
And when we talk about like the policies within organizations that need to be looked at when we want to transform organizations, do we start there? Do we start at that core of saying it's not about you just singling me out as a Black woman, but can we look at the contracts? Can we look at how HR policies are instituted? How do we challenge those policies and challenge those things in order for them to favor working Black women such as yourself and myself, who have children to drop off at school, who have children to pick up from school, who have to cook and clean? And now during this lockdown, especially, where there's the lunch breaks that the children are going to go on soon when they come out of the classroom. I'm here, I'm working whilst they are in the classroom. I have to cook dinner, I have to put them to bed. And all of these things have to flow into each other. How do we challenge those policies in times such as this?
So I think there's a number of things that come into play. Number one is obviously starting with your line manager and having a conversation about your changed situation, to be able to say, look, you know, in light of the environment that we're in, this is how my situation has changed. This is what my days look like, and therefore this is how I would like to readjust my work time. These are the hours that I'm available. These are the hours when I can have meetings, because in these other hours I have to do A, B, C, D with the kids because they obviously are homeschooled. There must be flexibility. Organizations that have been inflexible during this time are very, very abusive. And there's a lot of people who have experienced that. But it's important to have those conversations and to have them in writing.
Document everything.
Document everything. I can never stress that enough. Document every single thing. But I think, you know, a lot of organizations speak about transformation. They speak about diversity. And I think it's important when they are speaking about those conversations, and even going to HR and saying to them, okay, so what exactly does that mean? Don't tell me about ownership. Don't tell me about what percentage of Black women or Black people or people within the LGBTQIA plus community are, you know, in certain positions. Tell me about practically what does diversity look like in this organization, because where do you bring in intersectionality? Because you can say, we're going to bring in more senior Black women. Okay, sure. I come in, I'm a Black woman. I'm a single Black woman, right? I live in a country with the highest gender-based violence rate. So if I'm required to come to work early in the morning when it's dark, and I'm required to leave when it's dark, how are you protecting me? How is your organization showing that it understands the environment within which?
And I mean, there's also the old saying that when you leave a workplace,
I'm a mom. When do I drop off my child? And if I'm an exco, why must an exco meeting start at 7? When am I supposed to take my child to school? So there's so many things within organizations that are still built around the ease that men have, because the wife will take care of this, the wife will drop the kids off at school, the wife will feed them breakfast, he gets to just, and that whole thing needs to change. And HR policies definitely need to be challenged. They need to be challenged because they're not inclusive enough. They need to be challenged because they're not intersectional enough, but they also need to be challenged because they're far too vague. If an organization says we don't tolerate bullying, okay, give me a checklist of what bullying is according to you, so that if I experience this, I can come and say, I experienced this at the hands of this person, so therefore I want to lay a formal complaint. That stuff doesn't exist, and so people feel stuck. You know, we have these experiences as Black professionals within the workplace, and you know something doesn't feel right, or you don't like the way somebody spoke to you, and you know that it's either because there's a race-based issue underneath that, or it's a sexism-based issue underneath that, but you can't articulate it, and it's not in a policy because they don't actually speak about it outright. So what do you do?
Absolutely.
And that's the biggest frustration.
Absolutely. And the importance is that we need to be able to ask the uncomfortable questions, ask those things, and document every part of it. And I mean, there's the old saying that we don't leave a job. You don't leave a job, you leave a bad boss. And we've seen so many people leave their jobs, considering their jobs, and consider leaving their jobs because of toxic bosses or toxic line managers or toxic leaders in the way they treat us. I'll give you some examples. We have the micromanager. We have the kind of boss who wants to know and nitpick everything. The one that's checking you whether you're on the Teams meeting 1 minute to the time you're supposed to be on, and the one that's checking that you're on your emails every hour, on the hour. And then we have the kind of bosses that play the blame game. Everything must be blamed on you. There's no pass on any mistake that you make. And them themselves are never to blame for anything that happens. It was Usihle, or it was Olwethu who did it. The no respect boss who emails at all hours. I mean, I've seen a few people here that are like, hey man, I'm accessible all day, every day to my team. And it gets a lot. It gets taxing. And they forget how to spell your name even. We've been working together for 5 years and you still don't know that Olwethu is actually spelled with an H. So what are your thoughts on this? And I mean, this is likely to happen all the time. You know, when I think a lot of us, especially as Black women, we get so scared to call out these little things, and we get scared to call out what we perceive as the little things, like the micromanager. Shame, no, they just want to check that I'm doing things right. Shame, the one who's blaming me for everything, they just don't want to take responsibility. So I'll take the slack, and one day I'll prove that I'm actually a hard worker. Shame, it was just a mistake, and they just really just genuinely are spelling my name like they say it. And these are like the subtle things of racism that kick in, guys. These are like the subtle in. And it tears down on your mental health over time.
Your husband is such a troll.
He is. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten an email with my name spelled like that.
So the first thing for me with dealing with the issue of line managers is that the first point of responsibility and negligence lies with the organization, because somebody being good at their job and being promoted doesn't automatically mean that they have the capacity and the ability to be a manager of other people. And I think that we need to be very clear about that. And, so many people, yes, they may be good at what they do. They may be very efficient and produce excellent results, but they are horrendous people to other people. And so they have no business managing people. And that's something that organizations need to be treating with so much more care than they do. They don't. And so what it does is it becomes very harmful for the people who report into them, because you'll never be good enough. It'll never be right. They'll never be happy. Micromanagers generally, I found, are people who are incredibly insecure, people who don't know their own jobs, and so they micromanage you so that they don't get exposed for the most part. And when you even are dealing with managers who like to pass the buck and always want to blame, that's a sign of very poor leadership, very clearly, because leaders are always the ones who have the ultimate accountability for any and everything that comes out of their department and from their team members. And if your team members are doing things that are wrong, you should have been ensuring that they are equipped, that they are trained, that they are shown how to do the right things. If you're not doing that, that's a dereliction of duty. And so, you know, if your line manager is blaming you for things and you know that they're talking crap, document it in an email and say, you raised this issue on this basis. Here is my, you know, version of events. How do we then rectify it, and how do we manage this going forward? Because you want to be able to show that this is what you suggested, they said no, and when they said no, it made you unable to do A, B, C, D. Because there are bosses who do that, who will sabotage their team members by, you know, making you unable to do certain things or saying no so that your hands are tied, and then they want to blame you for not being able to achieve that particular outcome. But also it's important to figure out who the power players within your organization really are. Pay attention, because it's not always just about the titles or people who are directly within your department. Pay attention to who actually has power and influence in your organization, and figure out how you can get close to that person so that they know who you are, they know what you do, they know that you work ethically, they know that you produce work of high quality, because then those people will be able to vouch for you when opportunities in the organization do come up, or when somebody's trying to badmouth you by talking crap or making up stories about you. There will be somebody who will be able to say, that's not the type of person that I know this person to be. Can we look a little deeper into this? Maybe let's investigate it and see, you know, where this is coming from. Too often, nobody knows who we are within an organization outside of our direct teams. And so nobody's able to actually stand up for us when we are being bad-mouthed or being sabotaged within the organization. But I also think that, you know, being in lockdown, working from home, for people who are in toxic work environments, or you're dealing with a toxic boss, and it's very, I know how stressful it is to even think about trying to confront that person, to think about sitting and having a conversation and saying, I really don't like it when you do this. I know that it can be incredibly scary. Working from home is a great opportunity for you to start to practice how to be more assertive, because you can do it in writing. You can start teaching yourself how to push back, whether that means, you know, Googling some tips or watching some TEDx videos, or whatever the case may be. There are tools that are available to help you to be able to be more assertive, to do so in a professional manner that doesn't compromise you professionally, and in a way that will ensure that you are protected and are able to create a safer environment for yourself within the workplace. And also to create boundaries. Boundaries are so important.
Absolutely. And then also, I wanted us to dig into, you know, a lot of Black women don't get or don't move up the corporate ladder, and they deal with the glass ceiling. And the excuse is always within an organization that they're not actually trained to move to the next. They have gaps. When they do their reviews, there's gaps that are not filled. And I want to tie it back to what that does to our mental health, and what organizations' work is in being, in firstly, ensuring that these women are actually skilled to move to their next, and our work that we need to do for our mental health in order to ensure that that blame does not fall on us.
Well, there's so many things that Black women deal with in the context of the workplace, which all has an emotional and mental impact on us. So the first thing is that we have to code switch every day. So when I walk into the office, I've got to leave Sihle in the car, and I've got to show up as this prim and proper, acceptable version of myself that is considered non-threatening to the white people, right? Because we also don't want to be angry Black women. And so already a part of you is not with you. You show up as a version of yourself that's not yourself, simply because that's what they expect you to be as a Black person within that workplace. So that's the first thing. And so then you assimilate to this culture because you want to be successful, right? You want to progress in your career, and you want your work to be acknowledged. And so we have always been taught that if you work hard, and you work harder than everybody else, and you do more, and you show up earlier, first to leave, first to show up and last to leave, or all of these crazy things are somehow going to help us be noticed and give us opportunities to those promotions, which is a lie, because white people don't do that and they go along just fine in life. Right? It's something that's just told to Black people, that we're only as good as the labor that we produce. But white people are just good because they're good. And any organization that says that they cannot find Black women for particular positions is lying. They've never even bothered trying to look. Black women are everywhere. In most countries, Black women are the most educated group.
Absolutely.
Right up until doctorate level. If you look at the US, I think probably about between 60 and 70% of doctorates in the US are Black women. So we're educated, we're highly skilled. Everybody knows Black women work the hardest in any environment. And so it's a lie. You know, all of these lies are concocted to ensure that Black women don't get to progress. And that's why it's so important for us to start questioning what these policies mean. What do you mean when you're saying you have a new transformation plan strategy? What do you mean when you say you have a new diversity strategy that you're implementing? What does that look like practically? How are your hiring practices going to change? The systems that you're using to vet CVs when people apply for jobs, who do they work against and who do they work for? What triggers are picked up to decide whether a CV gets looked at further or doesn't get looked at further?
Absolutely.
Those things are so. What are the biases of the people who are in positions to make decisions? So if you have recruiters and HR people, are they racist? If they're racist, are they going to look at a CV with a Black name on it? If they're homophobic and they happen to know somebody's name from social media and they know that they're part of the LGBTQIA plus community, are they going to look at their CV? No. You know, if they are sexist and they look at me on social media and they know that I'm feminist, they're going to be like, oh, fuck that, she's a troublemaker, and not even bother looking at my CV.
Absolutely.
So there's so many different layers within organizations that need to be looked at if we want to talk about real transformation.
I want to also talk about, you know, the toxicity within the workplace. It does not, to try and suppress the comfortability in the workplace does not work in our favor. It really doesn't, because you come out a mess. But there's also the verses, which is, it's totally messy anyway, but am I willing to risk it all and lose it all? Is speaking up worth the risk? I think a lot of women that are mothers, that are single mothers like yourself, Sihle, are like, Sihle is brave, because am I willing to risk it all and lose it all in the process when I have so much black tax and I must still feed my children? Where do we say to ourselves as this generation of Black women that we need to be like you said, we are the ones we need. We are the ones that are going to change things so our children don't have to deal with this. At what point do we say we need to draw the line there and literally be the generation that cuts this nonsense, where the root cause is, forces these policy changes and effects the changes? It might take a toll on our emotional and mental health now, but things need to change.
It starts with a decision to fight.
And that's the thing, though. I think when you say, sorry to disturb you, but to cut you there, it's, and I want you to really get into that fight, because it is a fight. We are political bodies, and we were born that way.
Yeah, it starts with a decision to fight, because you have to be very conscious about choosing to fight, and then how you're going to fight, and then who you're going to fight with, because you can't fight it on your own if you actually want meaningful change. And the system that exists has continued to exist for as long as it has, because we've never fought this fight together as Black people. There's Usihle here, there might be Olwethu there might be Bakang somewhere else. Little voices here and there are not going to make the kind of impact that is truly required. Black Lives Matter is currently a big thing in the US, right? Ever since, you know, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were murdered by the police. Adidas employees in the US at the headquarters, the black employees down tools until Adidas came with a plan of how they're going to address racial inequality. They did not work. They were unmoved because they understood why they were fighting, and they understood that they needed to fight it together in order for anything to change. You have to want the change more than you're concerned about what's going to happen right now, because the reality is that this job that you have right now is not the only thing that's for you. It's not the only opportunity you'll ever have. It's not the end of the world. But what type of world are we creating for our children? I always think every generation has a fight standard. We have seen it. We have seen it over the years. We've read about it in history. Lord, Mamweni, Nelson Mandela, Mandela, may she rest in peace. We have been like, oh, what a powerhouse. She fought, she was fearless, she was this, she was that. And then
absolutely,
this is a very, very big battle for us, and we have a very big opportunity available to us to create something meaningful, to fight for something that is bigger than us, to fight for something that we might not even be able to benefit from now. We will probably never benefit from the work that we're doing, but it requires us to work together. It requires us to be able to understand that we need to have a plan. There isn't one way to be an activist. It isn't just about marching. It isn't just about, you know, legislation. It isn't just about, you know, the speaking up at work. It's about all of those things working together for the same purpose. It's about people who will say, okay, I can't march, but I can give money to pay for lawyers if anybody gets arrested. Or I can't pay money, but I'm a lawyer and I can represent you for free. Or if your employer is firing you unfairly, I can represent you as a labor attorney for free. It's about showing up for each other using whatever resources are available to us, so that we're able to stop, you know, this thing of Black people showing up and having to fight for themselves on their own, with nobody to back them up, with nobody to amplify them, with nobody to say, you know, inja wa, inja wo, you know?
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to be. Like, I honestly wish we could get to a point where if a Black person says, I have a grievance coming up and I've been unfairly treated and this is what I've been going through, but I don't even know how to fight for myself, where anybody, I could say, okay, when is your hearing? I will come and speak on your behalf. Just give me the briefing. Give me the information. I'll come and stand next to you. I'll come and speak up for you. I'll come and do this for you. We need to do that. Like, I myself, if you need me to come and speak for you at your grievance hearing and I'm available, holler at me and I will do that. That's how we need to show up, right? Absolutely. We need to put our money and our actions where our mouths and hearts are, because, honey, I will come in there and I will deal with your employers if that's what you need me to do, because I'm not emotionally attached to them, but you are. And that's where the difference is. And for some people, you know, it might be a case of your colleagues don't want to represent you at a grievance hearing because they still have to work there. So if you work at FNB, why can't an ally who works at APSA come in and stand up for you and represent you? Why aren't we thinking differently about this?
Absolutely. And that's what I love, guys, about Sihle Bolani. It's not just about us standing for ourselves in the work that she does. It's also about strategically working together and lending our voices to each other to be able to achieve the bigger mission, which is we need to diversify, we need to transform, we need to change, tangible change for the future that we want. And it's not just for our children, but also for ourselves and our sanity, our sound minds, sound homes, our children feel and see everything we go through. And the last thing we want is to raise children that have to recover from their childhood because their very own parents went through it. We end up raising the same people that we are, broken, hurt, harmed children. Thank you so much, Sihle. We truly, truly, truly appreciate it. And hopefully we're going to be coming together again soon. I will be in touch, and we will have more conversations such as this, because I think this is just the start of getting people to move into action of things we need to do to be able to stand alongside each other and be proper allies for each other. Absolutely. Because I'm even saying, Sia Police, we need you to be able to be our allies and to speak up for us and to say, Usihle was done wrong there, and you, Ubanbani, you will be held accountable. So thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you so much for having me.